Thank you, Deacon Merck. Good morning to everyone. We certainly welcome you on this wonderful day, especially if you like rain. This is your kind of day if you like rain, and it's still coming down, but at least we don't have to shovel it. And so we are blessed. We welcome our great team that's here to talk to us about all of the work we have to do to remain healthy, personally, governmentally, politically, economically, relationally. Health is a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week endeavor. And we are grateful to be here from Boston, from Atlanta, and certainly all of Philadelphia who are here. Thank you. Bishop Morris is here, who is the founder of Mount Airy Church of God in Christ. And he's 91, has good kidneys, good bladder, good heart, good lungs, good legs. And so since he's such a poster person for health at 91, I just want him to come and breathe a word of prayer. Can you help me welcome our founder, Bishop Morris, who celebrated 58 years yesterday at Mount Airy.
God bless you, Pastor. I certainly say good morning to each and every one that's here this morning. I labored last week with our congregation about the importance of health. And then the Spirit spoke to me and said, well, you didn't make the workshop. And so I can't talk about being healthy, and I don't make myself available to it, so here I am. When I woke up this morning and saw the rain, I heard a speaker say, you're 91, you don't have to make it. But then another voice said to me, you better make sure you make it so you get this information. So we're going to bow your heads for a word of prayer. Most gracious Father, we pause this morning with thanksgiving and praise for another day of life, for we realize that life is in your hands. And we come each and every morning thanking you for the gift of life. We ask now, as we are gathered for this most important session, that you will open up our hearts and minds and understanding, that we might be received the information that will help us individually and help us collectively as we spread the good news about the importance of health. Bless our presenters. Give us a listening ear. And be sure we get our name to praise. For we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. All right, clean your mic before you Dr. Tuckson. You hand it to me and I'll clean it. Being a colon and rectal surgeon, this is about as clean as anything gets that I work with. Thank you, sir. Welcome to everyone that's here today, and also those of you who are online. I want to thank you for being here. And for those of you who were here last week, welcome back. Just as a kind of recap of what we did. Oh, I might point out, for those of you who are online, if you have a question or concern, please fill it out. We'll get the question. They'll pass it down to us. If we can't answer it online, we'll make sure we get our panel and to discuss the point that you want to raise. We'll make sure we get that sort of thing answered. Last week, we heard from some very good speakers, some of which are here with us again today. But I want to remind you, let me start off with the same kind of thing we started off with last week. How many of you know how many kidneys you have? Raise your hand. How many you got, ma'am? Go ahead. How many? 2. You got 2. All right. What is the big function of kidneys? Anybody know? What do they do? Go ahead. Speak up. Say it again. Filter. Filter what? Filter blood, remove toxins. Okay. Do they do anything else? Yes, ma'am. Say it loud. Go ahead, speak up. Bishop's not going to get mad at you. Go ahead, say it loud. You're right there, yeah. Bowel Bowels? No, not quite. Close, but not quite. They're right next to the area for the bowels, but not quite. Remember, as far as our kidneys are concerned, they filter out toxins, they do that sort of thing. What's the number one cause of kidney problems? Anybody? Blood pressure. Anything else? Diabetes. Right. So number two big things are blood pressure and diabetes. How many of you know if you're diabetic or not? Okay. So all of you all have done screening for diabetes. Is that correct? How many of you know if you're hypertensive or not? Very good. How many of you who know you're diabetic and or hypertensive are taking medication for it? Keep the hands up. How many of you taking your medication on a regular basis? Okay, good. How many of you know if your family members are diabetic and or hypertensive? Okay, that's very good. How many of you know that there's a genetic predisposition for kidney disease? You were here last week then, weren't you? See, Dr. Hall, they were listening to you, sir. They were paying attention to you. Well, I think this is important because almost 1 million people, as you'll hear later on, have renal disease. Of that, about 2/3 of the patients are on dialysis. About 1/3 of those patients have had kidney transplantation at some point during the years. This is a significant problem in our community. And we're fortunate to be partnered here with Mount Airy Church of God in Christ. And I got to commend you, Bishop Felton, in the group. This is just wonderful that you're hosting this program in cooperation with Ardelyx Pharmaceutical and with the HEAL Collaborative. And I said it last week, and I'm going to say it again. How many of you can name me a pharmaceutical company? Anyone, just name me any large pharmaceutical company. Yes, ma'am. Pfizer. You're not supposed to say that name here. Come on now, see? But that's good. Pfizer, yes, ma'am. Merck, okay. How many of you ever heard the name Ardelyx? Ardelyx. Yeah, you haven't heard it before, have you? I guarantee you, you will know that name before you leave here today. But the point being, you got a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical company that's come into the house that Bishop Morris has built to bring you news about kidney disease. And I think you have to give them a hand for that. Thank you very much, Ardelyx, for coming out and doing that. So we're going to get things started here today. Now, as you already heard, there's a pre-survey to fill out. Please do so. At the end of the program, there's a post-survey, which will have you fill out then also. Don't fill out the post-survey just yet, even though you want to say, man, it's the most wonderful thing I've went to, and I'm glad that I came. I appreciate that, enthusiasm and optimism, but don't fill out the second part until after we finish everything. Our first speaker is going to be Mr. Paul Pierre. He is a Senior Vice President, Patient Advocacy and Government Affairs with Ardelyx. Paul's going to speak to us a little bit about, what's going on as far as how Ardelyx is involved in this and why we're here. I'll clean this off. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pastor Felton, Pastor Morris, and the family here at the Mount Airy Church. Thank you for having us. My name, as you mentioned, is Paul Pereira, and I'm with Ardelyx. And yes, you probably haven't heard of us. We're a very small biotech company, and our mission is to discover, develop, and ultimately deliver innovative treatments where there's a high unmet need. And we've been able to develop a treatment for patients that have suffered from kidney failure, that are on dialysis, and they're trying to treat a condition known as hyperphosphatemia. I know it's a big word, but Dr. Laura Williams will be explaining more about it. It's high phosphorus levels, which is a leading complication for patients that are on dialysis. And while we're excited that we developed a treatment, it was approved by the FDA last October, there are threats to access to not just the medicine we created, but other phosphate-lowering drugs. As CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, are trying to pursue a policy that will move these drugs out of Medicare Part D as in dog and into a payment system that we know will cause patients challenges accessing these medicines. So this is why we're here to talk to you today about the issue, about the importance for Congress to take action. So hopefully through our discussion, we can listen, we can learn from each other, not just about the issue, but the importance of advocacy and the importance of raising your voices. So thank you so much for your time, and look forward to this discussion with you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Paul. Appreciate that. How many of you know what a kidney looks like? Yes, ma'am. What does it look like? Like a bean. Now, come on. Lima bean? Do they call them limas? No, they're called what? Kidneys. So it looks like a what kind of bean? Kidney beans. There we go. And for those of you, if you're like me, you don't know what that looks like, there is a jar out there where you can guess the number of beans that are there if you had any questions. And believe it or not, if you can guess the number of beans that are in that jar, you get to register to vote. Y'all remember those days, don't you? Yeah. They're not so far away, unfortunately. Now, I think it's very important that it's nice when you hear someone from a pharmaceutical company come and tell you about kidney disease and hyperphosphatemia. It's one thing when you hear your physicians talk to you about hyperphosphatemia and kidney disease, but it's far more impactful and perhaps far more important and memorable when we hear it from a patient. And we're lucky today to have with us today Ms. Lisa Parker. She is a renal dialysis patient who is living with hyperphosphatemia. She's going to tell us a little bit about what that's like. Ms. Parker, please come on. That's a beautiful sweater.
Thank you, Dr. Tess. I know I'm on the time limit, Dr. Texan, so I am putting myself on time, okay? All right. All right, okay, thank you. No problem. Thank you so much, Mount Airy Church of God. Excuse me. Thank you so much, Mount Airy Church of God in Christ, Bishop Morris and Bishop Felton. Thank you so much for having me here. I am Lisa Parker. I'm Lisa Parker from Lithonia, Georgia. I am 54 years old on dialysis. I've been on dialysis for the past 5 years and currently on the transplant list. My story today is basically about one day I was just at Sam's warehouse and I was extremely tired. I actually laid on the floor. I was so tired. And I was sent to the hospital and found out that day that I was basically at the end of stage 4. A month later, I became a dialysis patient. It turned my world around because I did not know the only symptoms I had was I was very tired. I thought I had to exercise more, things like that, but it turns out it was kidney disease. So through my journey, I had some rough spots in my life, and at one time I considered suicide. And at that time, God stepped deeply in my life. I've always been praising God, but he stepped deeply in my life to let me know that I need to realize that he's there for me, and he will never leave me nor forsake me. So after that, I spoke to one of my girlfriends, my best friend, and she told me about a kidney support program at the church she was working at, and it's called Kidney Connection Plus at New Life Church in Decatur. Because of that, I was talking to them once a month, and it gave me a voice. It gave me a voice to look at the hyperphosphatemia that I was going through, the itching, the scratching, the feeling like bugs are crawling over you, trying to figure out what foods to eat, taking this large binder 8 to 10 times a day. On top of that, having other illnesses. You know, just because you have kidney disease, you start having more heart disease if you didn't have it already. You have a lot of stomach issues, nausea, vomiting. You have anemia. I have that also. Just a whole list of things. Everything is different. Everything is different for everybody. And so in my case, it was so many things happening, and I didn't understand what was going on. Through the Kidney Connection Plus, I learned more, and I became a part of, Hill Collaborative found me and started speaking for Hill Collaborative. Through that, I really started listening. You will hear from Dr. Williams very soon, and Dr. Williams is a great teacher about kidney disease. And I started speaking up for myself. I started advocating for myself and just learning people, meeting more people, like the lovely people at Ardelyx. So from there, when I was learning about all these things, I'm still going through things. You know, I'm still trying to press on and go through things. And one thing about it, just like God, how he sent his son to be born in a manger, and then how afterwards King Herod tried to kill all the firstborns, trying to kill Jesus. You know, we go through things. We're a child of God too. And the thing about it is, through any type of disease you may have, especially kidney disease, because there's so many diseases that people may think is worse. But cancer, you know, anything like that. But you have to understand that you're going through it. So you have to go and advocate for yourself. You know, if you know you have high blood pressure or diabetes, get tested for kidney disease. It's just a urine test. Talk to your doctor. If you don't feel comfortable, talk to a family member, talk to your spouse. Let them know something's not feeling right. Because this kidney disease is far more than we could ever expect. There was one day that I went to the grocery store, and I went to a coffee shop in the grocery store, and this young lady was there, and we were talking, and basically I was just letting her know I used to work at this coffee shop years ago. And she asked me what was I doing now, and I told her I wasn't doing anything right now. And so she asked me why. I'm kind of looking at her like, okay, you're real nosy. But I told her, I said, I have kidney disease, I'm on dialysis. And she said, oh, how are you feeling? And I'm like, I have my ups and downs, but I'm okay. So she said, my mom was on dialysis. I said, oh, okay. I said, so she has transplant? She got a transplant? And she said, no. She said she died. And she said she didn't want to burden anyone anymore in the family. She didn't want to go through all the things that she was going through, taking all of these medications, taking all of these binders. So she gave up. So she grabbed my hand and she said, please do me a favor. And I said, what's that? And she said, please don't give up. She said, just please do not give up. And I told her I wouldn't. So I went around the corner and I kind of prayed to God, you know, just praying to God for her strength, that her mother had just died a year before her telling me this. And as I was praying to God for her, I started crying, I realized, God, you are talking to me through her. I was going through something during that time where I found out that I have pericarditis, and that's an inflammation of the heart. And this has came from kidney disease. And so I was really kind of low at that time. But he was talking to me through her. She was telling me about her struggles with her mom and how her mom gave up. And I'm here right now to tell you, please do not give up on anything that's going on in your life. Pray about it. Kidney disease is something that we need to really talk about in our community. We do not know the different things that are going on in our lives or each other's lives. We don't know the feelings that we're having, if we're feeling down, if our heart starts fluttering differently. So I'm encouraging you to please find out, advocate for yourself, stand up, read all the information that is in this packet from Hill Collaborative. They are a great, informative nonprofit company. Only thing that I need to say is this: God will not take you to it without helping you go through it. And I want everyone to know that this is so true. I'm a living example. And I thank you so much.
We'll be hearing a little more from Ms. Parker when we have a panel after Dr. Williams speaks. Our next speaker is Dr. Laura Williams. She joined our delegates as the Senior Vice President for Global Therapeutics, Strategies, and Patient Advocacy. She's currently the Chief Medical Officer. Dr. Williams is a graduate of the University of Iowa School of Medicine. She subsequently went to the University of Michigan for her internal medicine training, and then went to the University of Washington in Seattle for a fellowship in infectious disease, and also did a master's in public health and epidemiology. She's eminently qualified to be here with us today, and I'm down in Kentucky right now, so we're in tall cotton right now when we got people like Dr. Williams with us. I get to say that now I'm in Kentucky. I should say tall tobacco, I don't know. But anyway, she's going to speak to us today a little bit about protecting health equity in kidney care. Dr. Williams.
Thank you so much for being here, allowing me to be here today. Maybe just a little bit. To Bishop Felton and Bishop Morris, to the whole congregation. It really is a pleasure to be here. I just had knee surgery, so you can see me buckling a little bit as I come up here, but I'm grateful to God that things turned out just fine. So you had a question already about what the kidneys do, and we've answered it. People said it filters the blood, gets rid of toxins. You're absolutely right. It also helps to regulate your blood pressure. The kidneys also produce a hormone that keeps your red blood cells where they should be so that you don't get anemic. So when you get anemic, particularly as it relates to kidney disease, it's because the kidneys no longer are functioning and they can't produce that hormone. The other big thing that they do is part of what we're going to talk a little bit about today, which is it also filters phosphorus. So phosphorus is in everything we eat. It's in the good food, in the bad food. So it's in cheese, it's in nuts, it's in fish, it's in processed foods. So everybody gets it. It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. When your kidneys are functioning properly, it filters most of that phosphorus out through the urine. But when the kidneys fail, phosphorus builds up, and that's a problem because when those levels get high, that phosphorus binds to the calcium in your blood, and then it deposits in your blood vessels. So patients who have kidney failure have a lot of phosphorus, a lot of calcium. It binds to the blood vessels, and it causes an increase in both morbidity and mortality. So more bone disease, more heart disease, all of those things. And so it's a major issue for patients with kidney disease. So the kidneys are really important. That's the first part of this conversation, right? Major organ, really important. And when they stop working, that is a problem. And as you heard from Ms. Parker, a lot of times we don't know that our kidneys are not functioning because there's not a lot of symptoms that often go along with it. So let's just talk a little bit about background, about kidney disease. And then after we do that, I want to talk a little bit about what we're here to talk about today, which is there's so many social determinants of health: where you live, where you work, if you have access to health care, if you live in food deserts, all of those things. But also, policy is a very important part of health and health outcomes. So folks who are making decisions about, what drugs you can use, whether you have access to those drugs, what kind of care you get, what kind of health policy you have, what insurance is going to pay for this or that. So that's where we're going to spend most of the time. But we're all clear now about the kidneys and its importance. I think the next thing then, let's just talk about chronic kidney disease. About 37 million people in the U.S. have chronic kidney disease. Large number, right? And about 800,000 of those patients progress to what we call kidney failure, right? Where the kidneys are no longer doing all of those things we just said that they would do. And why is that a problem? Well, obviously it's a problem. It's a big problem. And when patients get to that stage, when the kidneys fail, there are really only two modes of treatment. One is transplant, and the other one is dialysis. And then you talk about, well, why do these patients progress to kidney disease or kidney failure? The two most common reasons, diabetes and hypertension. There are a number of other causes, right? There's genetic predispositions, particularly in African Americans. There's also a higher incidence of kidney disease in people who are exposed for long periods of time in the sun. So you think about construction workers, you think about road workers, high heat, long hours, high heat, manual labor, that sort of thing. It's that chronic exposure. They get dehydrated, the kidneys try to respond, and it's just repetitive, right? So there are a number of factors, but diabetes, hypertension are the two most common ones. And again, those are diseases that don't come with a lot of symptoms. So a lot of times we don't know. There's also, again, a family history of those sorts of things. So knowing your family history, knowing whether or not you have diabetes, hypertension. I had hypertension as a kid. I mean, I played basketball. I was, I dare say, pretty good. Anyway, it wasn't until, though, I actually got into med school and we started doing our blood pressure checks on each other that I noticed that it was elevated. And so, basically diet, continue to exercise, and that was mostly okay. And then when I got to become a first-year resident, I was taking care of patients, and all of a sudden I just got this huge headache, and it was just crazy. And so I had one of my colleagues check my blood pressure, and it was off the charts. So been on blood pressure medicine for a long time. It's now well controlled. But again, most folks don't have those symptoms. And so when I look at and I'm the youngest of 14. And so when I look at, there are 6 boys between me and the next girl. And when I look at all of them, all of us had hypertension, and most of them didn't know it until much later in life and suffered a lot more consequences as a result of it. So knowing your numbers is probably the best thing that you can do. Making sure that, somebody is checking your blood pressure. Making sure that, you get screened for diabetes. That's the way to prevent, getting to chronic kidney disease. And certainly, if you can prevent that, you're not at risk for kidney failure. So understanding that is really important. The other part of this is that when we look at just the numbers, the people who get to the kidney failure, 4-fold higher rate in blacks than whites, 2.5-fold higher rate in Hispanics than whites. So a higher proportion of disease, again, that follow those social determinants of health, right? If you didn't have access to care, I didn't get health insurance, really, until I became a doctor. We didn't have it. That was the case. So access to care is a big deal. It is a huge deal. Having that shared decision-making with your physician, questioning, asking questions, you tell them that you want to know your numbers. Have you screened me for diabetes? Have you screened me for chronic kidney disease? As Ms. Parker said, the kidney disease piece is relatively straightforward, right? It is, there's a urine test that's really cheap, and then there's a blood test. And they put those two together, and they can tell you right away whether or not you're impacted. And that's really important to know. Because the sooner you know, the sooner you can do something about it. You can treat it, and you can hopefully delay the progression to worse disease. So that's the background piece. So we know what the kidneys do. You got background in terms of the patients that this affects and the disproportionate amount of issues that go with this disease. The next piece really is now the policy piece. And I think we have some slides. If we could pull up the slides, I just want to go through the issue. So CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, has basically been paying for dialysis care for patients since 1972, right? So anybody in this country who gets to kidney failure, CMS pays for that. So what do they pay for? They pay for the actual renal dialysis session. So for the dialysis, they pay for any drugs that you need during that session. They pay for the staff that are caring for you during that session. They pay for any blood work that you're having to have during that session. They've been doing this since 1972, and they started out doing it as a fee-for-service sort of setting, right? In other words, the dialysis provider would provide those services I just outlined, and they would just bill the government, and the government would pay for it. Well, as you can imagine, those costs got, extremely high. So in 2011, they said, we're going to change this. We're going to go from a fee-for-service to a fixed payment system, a bundle system, right? And that bundle system has got to take care of everything that they do. So let's say that bundle payment is $250 for every time a patient sits in that dialysis chair. And that bundle payment is supposed to pay for all those things. And as you can imagine, medications have evolved over time, right? In every space, right? Whether you're talking cancer or, HIV or diabetes or any of those things, thank God medications have evolved, right? That we've learned more and we've tried to innovate in those spaces. Well, if you now have a fixed payment system that's, again, supposed to pay for the dialysis, it's supposed to pay for the equipment, the lab work, and the folks who take care of you, and then they add the fact that it's supposed to take care of drugs. Well, that doesn't do much for innovation, because as you get new drugs, that $250 by itself won't cover that. So what happens is that to break even, or in a lot of cases to make a profit, what happens? They go to the least costly alternative in terms of the drug piece, because they can't change that other stuff, right? The dialysis is going to cost whatever it costs, right? The staff pay, yeah, that probably does go up a little bit, but that's not so different. The labs, they're pretty constant. But what can change is new innovative therapies. And what you would like is that patients be treated in an individualized way. Because what I need for my issue may be very different than what you need for yours. And if you're going to treat me as one size fits all, therein lies a problem. And so in 2011, again, that's when they went to this fixed payment system. And so they said, okay, any medicines that are unique to dialysis, that need to be given during the dialysis session, they're going to go into this bundle system as well. And so they said, especially if it's a drug, or it's a drug that has both an IV injectable, like it can be given in subcutaneously or intravenously, and it also can be taken by mouth. So drugs that can be given as injectables or orals, they automatically went into that bundle system in 2011, whenever you had a situation where the drug was available in both forms. And then they said drugs that are oral only, those drugs will go in later. And initially they said in 2014. Well, what happened from a policy standpoint is that they reevaluated it in 2014, and Congress stepped in and said, we don't think that's a good idea for oral-only drugs to actually go into the bundle. So drugs that you could only take by mouth. And that's the issue that we're talking about today. We're talking about phosphate-lowering therapies. And Ms. Parker also mentioned that. She talked about hyperphosphatemia. So patients, once the kidneys fail, have a lot of issues, right? Anemia is one, because we talked about the fact that they don't no longer make that hormone that takes care of the anemia. Another one is called secondary hyperparathyroidism. Long name. Basically what it means is that there is a disorder in the minerals in your bone, right? And so the calcium and phosphorus is out of whack, it's out of balance. You have an increased risk for fractures and those sorts of things. That's a major complication. Hyperphosphatemia is another major complication. Again, the kidneys are not able to filter the phosphorus. And so when you look at these different complications, hyperphosphatemia carries a 6-fold higher rate of mortality than any of the other things. So it's of all of those, sort of issues, it's the one that is most pressing from a mortality standpoint. It is the one that is more likely to cause death in patients who are on maintenance dialysis. So it's a big deal. But what CMS said is that, look, we did this in 2017. We actually put another drug, another class of drug into this bundle system we thought it was the right thing to do. It was available IV and it was available in an oral form. And when we did that, that was really great. Well, some new data just came out, like maybe 8 weeks ago in October, to show that, in fact, that is not true. It isn't great. As a result of what they did, they decreased access to the more innovative drug, which was really much more potent in terms of lowering the levels that they needed to lower. And as a result of that, patients suffered. It's like doing an experiment on patients without real data. It's not something that you should want to do. But CMS said that when we did that in 2017, 2018, all the way to 2020, when we included that drug into the bundle, that was a good thing. It was a good thing for patients. They increased their access, and it was really good for Black patients. And because we did that for this drug, this class of drug, we're now going to do it for phosphate-lowering therapies. That's a problem. So let's go to the next slide. I've talked through all of this. These are just words, but trust me, I have shared with you everything that's on these slides. If you go to the next one, I want to get to the new data. So this is what CMS said when they did this initial experiment in 2018. They said, look, when we included this new class of compounds, they're called calcimimetics. That's the class that treats the issue that I talked about earlier, secondary hyperparathyroidism, the one that messes up your bone metabolism. Your calcium and your phosphorus is all out of whack, increases your risk for bone disease. So in 2018, they put this class of drugs into that fixed payment system, the bundle system. And they said, look, that was great. And the reason they say that now putting phosphate-lowering therapies into this bundle, the reason why that's a good decision is because of these 3 points. They said when we did this for calcimimetics, when we put it into the bundle, that there was increased utilization of that drug or those drugs across all patients, but particularly in Blacks. They said as the utilization increased, that's number 2, they said as the utilization increased, the cost at the dialysis centers went down. And then they finally said, look, we've been monitoring what we've done. We've looked to see whether or not there was any harm, and we haven't seen anything. So because of these 3 things, we think it's a good idea to now put these phosphate-lowering therapies into the bundle next. So this was sort of like not their first experiment, but their most recent experiment, right? So now if you go to the actual data, the next slide, please, I think is where we get into it. So this may be a little bit hard to read, but from here, but On the left of the graph on the left, and the left side of that graph where there's only blue bars, there were two drugs initially. Well, there are two drugs at the end. Initially, there was only one, and it was the oral drug. And that blue bar represents that oral drug. And what you can see, even without looking at the numbers, you can see that every year there was an increase in utilization from about 2011 to 2017 when you just look at the blue bars. So that was before the bundle. That was before these drugs went into the bundle. So my point is there was already increased utilization of these drugs without the bundle. So now if you look at the part of the graph that has both blue and yellow bars, these are now both of the drugs that are in this class. The yellow one is the IV drug. It's the stronger drug, it's the more potent drug, it's the more effective drug. And so that period is from 2018 to 2021. And so when you look at it, you can see that there's a decrease in the use of the blue bars, right? The oral drug. But you can see that the yellow bars start to increase a little bit more. But it's only during that 3-year period. And can anybody guess why there was an increased utilization? The yellow bars start to go up and then they go down. It's like a bell-shaped curve. Can you think of why that might have happened in this experiment? What was that? Yeah, you got it. That's about right. So what they did is they incentivized the dialysis centers by saying, if you use these drugs now that we put them in the bundle, we will pay for those drugs. We'll pay the average price plus 6%. So for the first 2 years, there was an increase, there was an incentive to use these drugs, right? And then in the 3rd year, they took away the 6%. And so you can see the utilization go back down. So when you're not incentivized or when there's a disincentive to use the drugs, then the dialysis centers stop using the more effective drug. So you say, okay, all right, they stopped using the more effective drug, but they still was using the other drug, so it can't be all that bad, right? Well, let's just go and look to see what the results show. Before we get to the results. Now, the second part of their argument was that we saw increased go back to that previous slide. So can you say that there's actually increased utilization? That's the point to be made here. So when you actually look at the left part of the graph where it's just the blue part, at 2017, I think the utilization was about 30%. Now when you go to the very end, I think it's 29 plus the whatever that is, I can't see it from here, 3%. It's only about a 2% increase. So whether it was inside the bundle or out of the bundle, utilization was about the same. So to say that utilization was increased because these drugs went into the bundle is absolutely not true. And this is data. This isn't our data. This isn't from our company. This is data from the government. This is the USRDS data. This is United States Renal Data Service data, and it represents all the patients on dialysis. So this isn't just made up stuff. This is stuff that was actually peer-reviewed and published just 8 weeks ago. So that first point, right, was that we're going to increase utilization if we put these drugs in the bundle. That didn't happen. Utilization was increasing independent of putting them in the bundle. Next slide, please. Because the next argument was, gosh, utilization not only increased when we put it in the bundle, but it was especially good for blacks. Well, you can actually see the same trend. So I'm not going to go through the blue and the yellow, but you can see the same trend. First, on the left is utilization in blacks, and on the right is utilization in whites. And what you can see is that the utilization has always been greater in blacks than whites. It's about 1.6, the ratio of blacks who use these drugs versus whites who use these drugs. And why is that? It's a well understood fact. It's because there's more of this disease in blacks, and the severity of disease is higher in blacks. So that ratio didn't change at all. When they put it in the bundle, it remained about a 1.6 to 1.7. So point number 2, it wasn't like great for blacks. Utilization didn't increase significantly in the bundle, and it didn't change whether you were black or white. That ratio was the same. So the third point was that, and then the second point was, okay, as we increase utilization, we decrease cost. Well, you decrease cost because you decreased utilization of the more innovative, more expensive drug. So if you don't use a drug, of course your costs will go down. And then the final point is we monitored these patients, right, to make sure that once we put this drug into the bundle, that everything was still good. Well, let's go to the next slide and let's see what you think about that. This is the actual study. It was a study done this year, as I said, published about 8 weeks ago, and it looked at 713 patients on maintenance dialysis, and it looked at what their outcomes were while they were on the more innovative drug versus 6 months after they stopped the more innovative drug. And what you can see in the table at the bottom is that, during the period where they tried this experiment, that 3-year experiment where they put it in the bundle, you can see that utilization of the more potent drug went down by about 60%. It says 58% there. You see that? And utilization of the less potent drug went up to 73%. And then on the far right of this graph, what you see is the PTH levels, the things that this drug was controlling. What you see is that those levels went up. And it went up 15% in just 6 months, and 15% of patients in just 6 months, but 23% in blacks. So 15% in all patients, but even more concerning in blacks. And so the very thing that you're trying to treat is actually getting worse. It got worse in 15% of all patients in the 6 months after they stopped the more innovative drug, and it got worse in 23% of blacks. So if you go to the next slide, you can see that this study, and this is just a graph showing the same thing. So you can see the increase in the blood levels that happen in black patients. That's the top bar. In the middle is the overall, all patients. And then non-black patients had the least effect in terms of a bad outcome. So if you go to the last slide, keep going, you can see that the data does not support any of those 3 reasons. And if you now take that point, so we've tried this experiment in one set of drugs. Now if you go to the next slide, this is the issue with hyperphosphatemia that I told you. Hyperphosphatemia, first and foremost, happens in way more patients, dialysis patients, than the condition that I just showed the data on. The condition that I just showed the data on happens in about 20% of patients who are on dialysis. Hyperphosphatemia happens in about 80% of patients on dialysis, and it carries a 6-fold higher rate than secondary hyperparathyroidism, the other disease that I just showed the data on. So it's a much more prevalent disease, and it carries a higher risk of death. So you just tried an experiment, it didn't work, and now you want to try an experiment on another condition that affects more patients and is more fatal. That doesn't sound right to me. Next slide. This is what I mean in terms of why hyperphosphatemia carries a higher rate of mortality. What this data shows is that, so if you look at the 4 to 5 range, actually the normal range for phosphorus is 2.5 to 4.5. But if you look at the bar in the middle that's shaded blue, let's just say that's the reference point. Let's just say that's a point for dialysis patients we'd be comfortable with them being in. Every milligram increase after that carries an increased risk in mortality. So that's an issue. So hyperphosphatemia is chronic kidney disease is a big deal. Kidney failure is even a bigger deal. The biggest issue with kidney failure is hyperphosphatemia, and now we want to enact a policy that would actually impact these patients even more. That's a problem, and there are things that you can do about it. There are bills in place that, if passed, would block this from happening. 3 times in the past, Congress has stepped in and said we shouldn't put these drugs, these phosphate-lowering drugs, into this bundled payment system. And there is a bill called the Kidney Patient Act that is in play, that this would be another effort from Congress to say, again, no, this isn't the right thing to do. And so we'll talk a little bit more when you hear the government affairs panel about what you can do to help impact that. All right? That's it. I know I went over a little bit.
Thank you very much, Dr. Williams. I alluded to a jar out there filled with kidney beans, and it's part of the Marion Lucker Kidney Foundation. And it's interesting, if you go and register, it's a chance to get a scholarship for someone from this area, $1,000 to go to college, anybody. And so please, I encourage you to go out and register. And and the interesting thing is that you probably like this, Lisa. This is something for patients who have renal disease. So kids who have renal disease, young people, help them as far as their cost. So again, during the break, go out there. You can pick up a little card and be able to enter into a drawing for that. Next, let's move on with the question about why our advocacy matters. We're fortunate enough to have a couple of really interesting speakers for this session. First, we're going to start off with Mr. Richard Hooker. Mr. Hooker is the Secretary Treasurer and Principal Officer of the Teamsters Local 623. Mr. Hooker.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning. How's everybody doing? I want to give 1,000 members, 350,000 workers, package car drivers, feeder drivers, and warehouse workers. These workers, our members, work in extreme conditions, whether it's extreme heat, cold, and so hydration is very, very important. So when we have our workers working on a package car in 100-degree weather, but on that truck, it's about 130 degrees. And you're constantly up and down, in and out of a truck. And you don't have time because of your employer, who doesn't really care about your kidneys, doesn't care about anything but getting those packages off that truck. Now, I know that sounds harsh, but that's just the reality of what it is. And so, when we have members who go through these things, high blood pressure, other issues, as far as lupus. If anybody heard of lupus? So lupus pulls on my heartstrings because my mother passed away from lupus when I was 5 years old. And I had a member who also passed away from lupus. Now, lupus attacks a lot of your bodily functions. One of the things it attacks is the kidney. And so she passed away from kidney disease. She had kidney failure, and I had to go to her funeral and watch a long-term member pass away because of what lupus did to her kidney. So this is very, very important to me. I was honored to be in the auditorium when Dr. Laura came to our conference in Las Vegas at TNBC to talk about the importance of checking on your kidneys. So she gave us a lot of numbers. Black folks were 3 times at risk of anybody else. So just imagine you have a black UPS worker working on a package car, 12 hours a day, high blood pressure in the extreme heat. What do you think that's doing to his kidney or her kidney? No hydration, I gotta get these packages off. Amazon workers, same situation. These workers are under attack, not just because of the bosses, but also they are not provided the same thing other workers may be. They have to work. These warehouses are hot. These trucks are hot. So this is why this advocacy matters for working class people, because we have to advocate not just for better working conditions, not just for higher wages, not just for a better contract, but also for better health care, period. Because some folks who go to work, they don't have high quality health care that you might have working for a UPS, who gives you really good health care. What about the folks who go to work for an Amazon who don't have health care like that? Or any warehouse, a Walmart, who's anti-union. These folks work in these conditions, but they don't have access to the health care that a lot of union workers have. So that's why this is very important to me. This is why it's important to the union movement, because again, it's not just about the contract, it's about making sure that when our members go home, they can have a high quality life. And so we have to make sure and advocate for things outside of just the four walls of fighting the employer. Kidney function is very, very important, especially to black workers. Because again, the data is there. The data don't lie. Right? I heard a rapper say, you know, men lie, women lie, but numbers don't. Right? And these numbers do not lie. Right? And so this is why this is important to me, because I've had to bury some of my members. I have a member right now who's getting ready to go into surgery for his kidney today. And I told him to call me before it happens so we can have prayer together. Because this is important, right? Workers, ever since the pandemic, they realize that they have the power to keep this country moving. There's an old commercial that says that America runs on Duncan. It doesn't. It runs on the workforce, right? Because when the pandemic had shut everything down, we still had to go into those trucks. We still had to go to those warehouses. Doctors still had to go to the hospitals. So this is important to all of us, because I know there's somebody in here who knows somebody who has kidney issues, works in the warehouse, works in extreme conditions, like on the construction site. It's hot out there, right? And so you have to maintain hydration to keep the kidney function moving and working properly. So that's why this is important to me, because it's important to my members, important to all of our workers. And so not that long ago, myself and Matt Lashley went up to D.C. to talk to senators and representatives about this bill, this kidney patient bill. But this is important. And we have to make sure, again, we advocate for working class people. Because, again, America was built on the working class, right? And so we have to make sure we keep the working class strong. So, again, please, let's make sure we talk to our family members. Let's talk to other workers. Let's talk to our politicians, our policymakers, to make sure that when it comes time to make sure that we stand up for workers, with this bill, we do that. Can I count on you guys to do that for me? All right, thank you guys so much.
First time I've had a chance to hear a Teamster speak like that. I hope it's not the last time. Different subject matter. Next, I'd like to bring up Dr. Jensen Hall. Dr. Hall is currently an assistant professor of medicine at Duke University. He's also a nephrologist and a researcher, as well as also continuing our discussion on advocacy. Doctor. Thank you, sir.
It's good to be back. How's everybody? Good. I just wanted to, I made special allowance for this to come back and have a discussion about policy, in the sense that I had a recent experience up on Capitol Hill where the opportunity to share some of these issues specifically with representatives and other people who are in a decision-making capacity. I felt it was really important to offer the perspective of the patient and the provider to people who maybe have influence over those interactions, but really don't know much about what they entail. I was surprised to learn how much of a variation there is from office to office, staffer to staffer, their level of knowledge and how well they were read in on these concepts. You have to understand that real life and the policy kind of setting are very separate, almost in certain aspects, almost completely unrelated. So you have the practical aspect, the lived experience, the patient who has to get up 3 times a week, show up for dialysis, kind of sit through that 4-hour session or however long it is, come home, have the day off to recuperate, and then go back. That's the patient experience, and it's a way more nuanced issue than what I'm describing. Then there's policy. They have a million things to consider, and these are issues that they span the gamut. So there's healthcare, national security, defense, all sorts of things that they're dealing with on a regular basis. So these issues come up one after the other, and you can imagine there are people that are petitioning them on a regular basis, wanting them to do something that they want them to do. So the only way to kind of become the loudest voice in the room, which is what I felt that the patients needed, was to add my voice to the conversation. And what little way I can do it beyond my vote, this is what I chose to do. In any scenario, when you're trying to describe kidney disease and the impact, the most important perspective you're going to hear is of a person who's going through it. So the patient is always going to tell you the most meaningful and pointed information about kidney disease. And we were there with a number of people. My group, it was a larger group, we got split into 2. Some went to see the representatives, some went to see the senators. I was a little jealous because I didn't get to go to the group that went to go see Jasmine Crockett, but that's okay. Next time. So nonetheless, the point was that we split and we went from office to office to share our perspective. Among the group of patients that was with me for the first half of the day was a woman who made a point that I really hadn't thought of, and framed kidney disease, at least in her experience for me, made me know that I had made the right decision to come on that day. What she described was what it's like to be a kidney patient. And what she said was, and this is for me even in that arena, doing work and research in kidney disease, I still hadn't picked up on this sense of what it's like. What she said is that she developed kidney disease when she was young, like 14, 15 years of age. They managed sort of the issues around it, keeping her out of kidney failure for as long as they could. But then by the age of 30, she kind of got married, got into family planning, had a baby, and that stress of that experience kind of put her over the edge into kidney failure. What she said then was, when people ask me what it's like, the only thing I can think of to say is that if you can imagine that at midnight you enter the ocean and you're swimming all night, waiting for the sun to come up. When that sun comes up, that's your alarm ringing. How tired are you after that? What do you feel like after that? How washed out? She's like, that's how I start my day. Now, I don't know that that's everyone's experience, but certainly if it's any of our experience, it deserves some attention, particularly legislators that have an influence on how those things play out. Now, you remember I said she was pregnant, and that's what put her over the edge. So she's going through that with a newborn, and fortunately, she was able to make it out, got a transplant, and so that new part of her life has started. But she's careful to remind people that kidney disease stays with you. Apparently the condition that she has, and she didn't share details, but the kidney disease that she has can potentially return. So it could compromise the function of the transplant. As a provider, we would have to deal with those issues too. But there's nothing that I can do specifically in that window of time where she's struggling and suffering, what she described as that midnight swim. So the best posture I would be in as a provider is to try to minimize the additional work that she has to do to just navigate this problem. And this situation around how the medications will be paid for, managed, what will be made available to patients, is one of those issues that kind of fall in the umbrella of additional kind of concerns, additional labor. Patients and doctors, when we enter these discussions about metabolic issues that we have to manage in the dialysis unit. It's an ongoing discussion. There's never a patient or a time that we go into the dialysis unit and don't have a specific conversation about phosphorus levels and how to manage them, particularly around the times when seasons are changing, food availability changes, people have, preferences for certain things, and you start to see little changes in the lab that reflect those preferences. We have to remind them, hey, you want to be careful about this, try not to do so much, have the nutritionist right near us so that they can offer alternatives. Your kidneys work for you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We are replacing about a tenth of that with the schedule. And so we're trying to manage all these peripheral issues to give patients the quality of life and, the protection in the condition that we can. So the policy implications are significant. The issues are very practical for patients. What I want you to take away from this discussion, beyond just sort of the general knowledge, and I would agree, that was a fantastic presentation, great summary, excellent teacher, and you all have benefited from how she pulled that information together and shared it. But beyond just that, think about the position that you're in, what you've heard that maybe your family members, your loved ones have not, and among the people that you know that have kidney disease or who have conditions that could set them up for it, make them aware of the types of discussions that are going on out in the world that could, if not now, but later, have a material impact on how you live and the way you live when these conditions develop. It's a very important issue. Partner with groups like HEAL Collaborative and other advocacy groups to figure out what there is to know and how you can position yourself alongside them to go and speak in some of these places. Because what I can say from my experience, this isn't the first time I've done sort of advocacy work like that, but once again, I was impressed by how attentively the staffers listened to the patient experience. They took that in, and it mattered to them when patients said things like, it is a really difficult time for me to struggle with this medication, where it took me 3 or 4 months to find the right thing that worked for me. That sticks with them, and I don't know if they're conditioned to be that way or if there's some sort of set of instructions that they get to listen out for certain things. Nonetheless, my confidence is they carry it back to the senators, back to the representatives, and that's what moves the needle. We hope that in a situation like this, there's quite a bit of collective concern that these visits to Capitol Hill have registered, and that people there who were receptive on the day, that matters in terms of what happens before the end of the legislative session. So I just wanted to let you know about my experience, that these types of activities really are purposeful and they can be fruitful. It's just a matter of figuring out where to get involved and how to apply your particular skill set and interest. And the voice of the people really can still matter and make change that's beneficial for all of us. So thank you for your time and attention.
Dr. Hall, please stay up here. I'm going to call up the members for our panel. First, I want to bring up Representative Billy Mitchell, Georgia State Representative, who's also the past president of the National Black Caucus of State Legislators. Dr. Mitchell, come on up here. Get also Mr. Hooker, if you please join us again, sir. Matt Lash, who's Director of Government Affairs from Ardelyx. And then Representative Andre Carroll, I think who's familiar to everyone here, from the Pennsylvania State, who represents this area. Representative Carroll. Come on up and join us. If you shake one hand, you got to shake them all, sir. Okay. Let's see, we got a chair over here for you. All right. Good. So, Matt, let's start off with you, because Paul made an interesting comment about when we're talking about coverage for things. He made a point about talking about Part B. Then also alluded, and both Dr. Williams also said a little bit about Part D. Could you please tell us again, what is Part B actually covering for us when we're talking about renal disease. And the difference between that and Part C, the Medicare Advantage programs, do these cover? Because we also hear a lot about that. And what is Part D? How do these things all factor in?
Yeah, thank you so much, Wayne, and I'll try to distill this in a way it even confuses me some of the time, so forgive me if any questions chime in. But basically right now how it works. In this issue comes down to choice in the sacred relationship between a patient and their doctor at the end of the day. So right now, if your kidney doctor writes you a prescription for a phosphate-lowering therapy, you bring it to your retail pharmacy and you get your medication. If these drugs are jammed into that fixed reimbursement through Medicare that the speakers before me spoke about, that choice and that autonomy will essentially be taken away from you as patients. And now the dialysis facilities will almost become the gatekeepers for who receives these drugs, because they're going to be reimbursed as part of that fixed reimbursement from Medicare to the dialysis facility. So that in a nutshell is really what this comes down to at the end of the day in terms of what you can do and the choices you can make with your doctor, and then the choices that bureaucracy down in Washington, D.C. really wants to take away from you, or unintentionally or what.
Yeah, but we're getting a lot of, we did prior to December 7th. We all were inundated with these messages coming in from Get Medicare Advantage programs. Is there a difference in when we talk about the coverage and in this particular issue about who's going to pay for these medications, if you have an Advantage program versus you have the standard Medicare when it comes down to the renal patient?
Right. I'm not as familiar with Medicare Advantage plans, Wayne, admittedly, but again, this really comes down to a patient's choice. So yes, there is a big difference in terms of how it is right now and how it could be if these drugs are bundled, because again, the dialysis facilities will essentially decide who, when, and what gets these medicines. And what's going to happen is, it's kind of like if you go to a restaurant and you get a value meal and corporate wants to add to that value meal. Inadvertently, the restaurant is probably going to phase things out or cut corners, if you will. And that's the same worry that we have if these drugs go into the bundle, that the dialysis facilities, as well-intentioned as they may be, they're already trying to squeeze every drop that they can out of the bundled reimbursement that they get from Medicare. And that if more is added on top of that, then they're invariably just going to say that we can't stomach that additional expense, and the patients at the end of the day are going to be the ones who suffer because of that decision. So I hope that kind of answers the question.
I want to remind everyone, if you have a question, please raise your hand and I'll come to you. And of course, those of you who are online, if you have a question, send it in and we'll make sure and get it. Dr. Hall, are we talking apples and oranges or apples and apples when we're talking about comparative therapy for patients with renal disease? It sounds as though we're talking about a new, totally different kind of therapy, or we're just talking something that's going to improve quality of life while taking a particular medication.
No, I think I don't think it's I don't think that we're talking about sort of minor issues of convenience. Let's say I think what patients and physicians experience on a fairly or not so infrequent basis is the ability to achieve the targets based on sort of some adjustment of therapy. So there may be for 5 or 10 people in a dialysis unit on a given session, there may be say 7 of them that have a common regimen, but the other 3 may need adjustments that are that include therapies that are off that schedule. And so what we're conserving by trying to avoid sort of bundling of these phosphate-lowering therapies is the ability of the patient and the physician to work together in an individualized way to achieve the targets, to keep them safe, and to individualize their therapy to the degree that we're able. That includes possibilities for them of innovative therapies that may make it to them under a completely different payment structure, but do better in terms of preventing the consequences of the long-term consequences of conditions related to their kidney disease, hyperphosphatemia being the subject now. So I think it's not just an issue of convenience or even an issue of preference. It really does have to deal with whether or not you have the latitude to be nimble and deliver to patients what it is that they need when they need it. That's what could be compromised here.
Question to our two representatives. We'll start with Representative Mitchell and then Representative Carroll. You'll respond after that. We heard Dr. Hall say that he went down to the Hill in Washington and he met with staffers. Didn't get a chance to meet with the person's name on the door, and maybe that's not a bad thing because maybe the person on the door doesn't know as much. But we got to look at the number of people who we have in the room with us right now. I would imagine each one of these people has an issue that they want to talk to you about. In your best, honest, legislative answer, notice I phrased that very nicely, I hope. No. But if you could please tell us, number one, how do we have access? Two, how do we get access if we don't? And three, not just access, how do we get you to hear what it is that we're bringing forward? Go ahead, sir.
Well, first of all, let me just say that I think this is what the church ought to be about, not just a Sunday kind of love, but to bring this kind of information. So Bishop Felton, I certainly do appreciate you being here and our delegates for sponsoring it, because I have found, to more directly answer your question, that particularly our people, we are a reactive type of folk. Much the reason why some of the issues that we have with our health care, personal health care, and our health care system, we are reactive. Much the same way with dealing with those who we elect to represent us, we are reactive, as opposed to taking preventive issues and making certain. I will tell you, as an elected official, there is nothing more powerful than going up to someone who represents you and saying, I live at 123 Main Street. My name is Billy Mitchell. I can vote for you. This is an issue that is important to me. There's nothing more powerful than that. Nothing. I suspect in this room there are many of you who've never used that approach. We vote and then we sit down and say, I wonder why this issue hasn't been addressed. I wonder why I only see my elected official when they come to church around election time. That's what I suspect that many of you do, as we do with our health care. As opposed to saying, there's an issue that's important to me. I'm not going to wait till they come around the church on election time. I'm going to go up to them and say, this is an issue that is important to me. Now, I tell you, when I was on the other side, Representative Carroll, I'm sure your experience this was similar. When I was on the other side, was not an elected official, I really thought this whole process was on the level. I thought that, everybody was going to be served equally and the like. But I will tell you that the process, by and large, is based on where you live, your demographics, and the like. Since I'm from Atlanta, I'm going to say, Martin Luther King said it best, of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health care is the most shocking and inhumane. And I will tell you that is certainly in Georgia, and I will tell you, Ms. Parker, you happen to live in Georgia, and I will say to you, Dr. Williams, I'm going to take you with me all around. I'm going to put you on a national panel because elected officials need to hear what you have to say. But in Georgia, you are from Lithonia, Georgia. You might be my constituent, so we'll get together afterwards. But the reality in Georgia, it is shocking how we deal with health care. And this is one of the reasons why I'm so glad that Buddy Carter, Congressman Carter, who used to be a colleague of mine, is sponsoring the Kidney Patient Act, because there needs to be a federal standard. State to state to state, the provisions are different. We haven't expanded Medicaid in Georgia. I don't know if you've expanded in Pennsylvania, but in Georgia, you haven't expanded. As a matter of fact, if you needed a transplant in Georgia, you have to give special provisions, because if you're too poor, they don't give you, the poor people don't get transplants in Georgia. You had to get some magnanimous corporation or whatever to do that. So the reality is, we need to have a federal standard where no matter which state that you live in, you have to. Now, I will tell you, Dr. Tux and I can go on forever. You had to give me this sign.
I knew the mistake when we gave a microphone to a politician, but we got another politician who wants to say something too, so let's just suffice it at that.
All right, so I'll reserve some comments to the next go-around as well.
Thank you, and absolutely fine, because, I am Rep. Carroll. I represent the 201st Legislative District, which includes Germantown, parts of West Oak Lane, and our parts of Logan, including where we are right now. So I do want to say, I know it's been said multiple times, but thank you to the church and to the bishop for having us today. Excited about the cross collaboration as we have unions in the building with us, along with subject experts like Dr. Williams. Thank you so much for your presentation. I learned a lot, and even as a state elected official, I'm not above learning. I know you mentioned the question pertained to how do we advocate for the things that you and your family deserve. I only know what you tell me. Unfortunately, a lot of times as elected official, we do spend times in halls of power, because that's where our jobs are located. But the things that I advocate in those halls benefit or affect people like you, and I need to know exactly what those things are. So don't think for a second when you send that email, when you make that phone call, or you're talking to a staffer or even myself, that I did not hear you. I'm literally, as the presentation was happening, I have a staffer by the name of Jamie Walker, who's here with me today, and we were just going over a few things that he's been hearing consistently through email. Those things do get briefed to us. I'm really new. I've been in the State House for less than 90 days. I literally just got inaugurated on September 30th.
Congratulations.
I won't sit up here before you and act like I know everything. I know a few things. The only thing I have in common right now with the gentleman from Georgia is that we just won an election, right? I'm pretty sure he knows many more things than things that I will learn as I move forward in this journey. But one thing I do know is that we only get what we fight for. If we don't fight for it, we don't get it. And when it comes to healthcare, it is a personal topic for me, because my grandmother, the woman who raised me, I lost her to liver cancer. And the thing that I know about when organs in your body fail, especially when we're talking about lungs, liver, kidneys, hearts, everything goes. We lose one of them, we lose everything. And it's very true when it comes to healthcare. Healthcare does disproportionately affect Black communities more than other communities across this country. And it's something that we are reactionary to and we're not proactive about. And although we know these things, we need to do better, right? Even like when it comes to like Black maternal health, that's been a really popular thing in the State House here in PA. And I've been learning a lot because my colleagues who's been advocating around Black maternal health has made this a core issue when it comes to what we're moving across the aisle in Harrisburg. So again, we will fight what you tell me to fight for, and don't ever believe that anything that you send to our offices is not being heard.
Thank you very much. We have a question over here.
You're gonna hold it for me? Thank you. Hi, my name is Jasmine Evans. I am a former dialysis patient and also a healthcare policy advocate. I just have a couple of questions. The first would be to your point about being reactive versus proactive, right? As someone who kind of occupies this space in the community of trying to put on like events or even like health clinics, right, so that we can be more proactive, a lot of times we run into roadblocks, right? Especially whenever we think about it from like state legislature or like city legislature of actually like putting these things on. So I would say like, what resources do you know of that can actually push these programs forward? And then lastly, as someone who does advocate not only on the federal, but also the state level as well, right? What do you know, up to your knowledge, is being done on the state levels to also advocate for these health issues as well?
Now, and I'll preface this by saying I know that with the elected Black Legislators Caucus, they have partnered with groups like HEAL. So what does the outreach look like, and how do other folks reach out, other than going through groups like HEAL and Mount Airy? How do they reach out so that you can get people participating in these kinds of programs? I think that's kind of what you're saying.
Well, I tell you, there's a couple of things that you can do. First of all, we got the former State Representative Stan Watson out here, and I tell you, he puts on a monthly community meeting that is superlative. I mean, there is no better community meeting anywhere in this nation than what he puts. He invites special guests to come and talk about various issues that are affecting the community. If you don't have one of those in your community, I suggest you do so. He gets sponsors and he feeds people. I go sometime just because I want a good breakfast, and then I hear whatever information they are giving. But he deals with so much of this information. There are meetings that I go to, as I said, only intending to get a good breakfast and go and then learn something. So I suggest that you do that. Thank God for companies like our delegates that are being able to sponsor events like this. I would suggest that you do that as well. But I would say to you all here, you all have so much power, and so many of you don't recognize the kind of power that you have in specifically answering your question. The reality is, as elected officials, and the Representative Carroll hasn't heard it yet, it's just 90 days, he will hear it. There's going to be people who say, how come that community over there seems to get everything they want, and this community over here seems to be underserved? Now, I could give you a lot of sociological theories why that is, but you want to know what the real reason that is? The people in the well-served community are informed and engaged, and they advocate for their best interests. And the people in the underserved areas are uninformed, unengaged, and don't advocate for their best interests. If we could miraculously pick everyone up from the well-served area and put them in the underserved area, and pick everyone up from the underserved area and put them in the well-served area, guess what would happen virtually overnight? The services would flip, because the people who are used to being informed and engaged and advocating for their best interests would continue to do so, and those who aren't used to being informed and engaged could continue to do so. So it's a matter of you getting together. I got a quick story that I'm going to, since you're from Lithonia, you may appreciate this. There's a high school, Stevenson High. Man, I probably shouldn't even mention the name of the school. But anyway, there was a high school that invited me to a PTA meeting. And sure enough, I went to the PTA meeting, and I was running late, got there just as the meeting was supposed to start, and I was shocked that the meeting was not well attended. I said, man, this is amazing. In any event, I went back. They said they had another issue about band uniforms a few weeks later, and I couldn't find a parking space. It was some band uniforms. I go into the meeting. I'm upset now. We had an important issue 2 weeks ago. Nobody's there. They upset about band uniforms, and they just packed the place out. And I flippantly said, look, you folks look like you're over 18 here. Take your doggone voter registration card to the next Board of Education and demand that you need new band uniforms. And I left. I said, man, here I am, spending my time on band uniforms. Do you know, a couple of weeks later, the president of the Board of Education comes to me and said, why you send all them people down to there? But do you know what happened? That night, I'm not talking about they commissioned a study, they gonna look into it. That night, they approved an appropriation for band uniforms. So my point being to you is you have to advocate for your best interests.
Before we move on to something different, Stan, why don't you stand up? Since you referenced Stan Watson, and this is going to be a mistake, he's deacon and a former representative, so I know he's going to talk. But how did you set up your program? And can we emulate that in other locales?
Yes, good morning again. It's very easy. What we did was that once I became elected, I asked the community, several homeowner associations in my district, to come together for a breakfast. And basically, I was trying to do two things. and that is to bring information to my community, but also to bring funds. In our world today, the way that most state legislators are read, what we have to do now as legislators, we have to bring either information or money to the community. If you're not bringing information or money to the community, you don't need to be a representative. You have to learn how to work across the aisle. You have to make sure that you know how to talk to another Republican that may not look like you, but have some of the same ideas and things that they have in their community we want in our community. So if you start a breakfast like that, you bring information and money to your community. A more informed citizen is a better citizen. A healthy church member is a good tither. Somebody ought to say amen. So if you're a healthy church member, you better tither. So that's why we're here for kidney. So as a representative, when I was a representative, I know that an informed constituent was a better voter. So it go hand in hand. So what does he do? He comes to organizations like churches and schools to get information, because an informed, concerned citizen is one that will know how to vote. They can go out and fight the battle because they have the information. But in today's age, and as I sit down and say this, if your representative is not bringing information or money to your community, you need to elect somebody else.
Present company excluded, of course. Dr. Hall, Dr. Williams said an interesting statistic, and even Mr. Hooker mentioned it. African Americans have a higher rate, sound like going on for dialysis or even end-stage renal disease, than in white populations. Now, if one accepts fundamentally there's not a whole lot of difference in people skin deep, what is the reason for this difference?
Yeah, so that is a really interesting and complicated question. There is absolutely a difference by race, and I just want to emphasize that as... Okay. I absolutely want to emphasize that race is not biological. It is a cultural, societal construction. So what some group of individuals calls another group of individuals, that designation is based on sort of sociocultural experience. It's not biology. What we do know about biology is that those differences persist and can be explained, at least in part, as it relates to risk for kidney disease at the genetic level. So I mentioned this last week, and if you haven't heard anything else about it, I wouldn't expect you to hold on to it, but there is a gene called apolipoprotein 1, and there are changes in that gene that occurred several thousand years ago that followed us in the transatlantic slave trade, that on the continent, Western Central Africa, were protective. They helped us to avoid certain types of infection, sleeping sickness, trypanosomal infection. But when you transplant people abruptly into an entirely new ecosystem and under certain conditions of stress and other sort of genetic admixture or sort of people sharing genes, that had created a whole new context for that gene and its function. And for a variety of reasons now, some we understand, or we think we do, and some we're coming to understand, that whole shift resulted in that gene that used to be protective in one context now being harmful in another. Because that is specific to African Americans or people of recent African ancestry, it is a situation that really affects us and puts us on the pathway to developing end-stage kidney disease at a much higher rate, uniquely. So depending on where you got dropped off of the ship, you may be called Black, you may be called Hispanic, what have you. But genetically, if you were part of that group whose genetics originated Western Africa, Central Africa, you could be at risk for this problem. So there are several studies that we as a community should be aware of and get involved in, because these are clinical trials that will ultimately influence, guide the development of therapies that specifically try to reduce our risk. This is not really the forum to talk about it, but I'm happy to talk more. And I think what we'll come to find as we learn more recently, that probably does explain quite a bit of the risk, probably other things like that as well.
Well, I think you brought up an interesting point, because Mr. Hooker, when you talked, you were mentioning about your drivers and some of the environmental conditions in which they're working in. So I'm going to ask Representative Campbell. We use the term social determinants of health, which I find is a very inadequate term. Rather, I think we ought to look at political determinants of health. And I say that because much of what we're looking at, these are decisions that were made by law, not just all de facto, by happenstance, by where we live. Representative Mitchell made an interesting point. If you took people not getting served, move them to an area that was being served, and switch them over, same thing, you're going to get the same result you were getting before. So how do you address, if I'm concerned, like Mr. Hooker brought up a point about his drivers, but I'm living in an area of high pollution or other factors that impact from a legislative perspective, what can you do about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. So, I mean, one of the things I hear us often talk about is that the zip code that we're born in does definitely determine our life expectancy. It's very true. So when I ask a question about why black folks are disproportionately affected by things that our white counterparts are not, is because redlining was a thing in this country, and it continues to show up every single day in our lives. Now, there's a reason why there's certain zip codes in Philadelphia where the asthma rate is higher than it is than when we go to Bucks County, than when we go to Chester County, or when we go to any other rural area in Pennsylvania. One of the things that learn about kidney failure, some of the key components are when we talk about like pesticides, we're talking about air pollution, we're talking about heavy metals like lead in our water. Right? So these are things that we can do. So when we're talking about like environmental justice, we have to take a holistic approach when we're talking about how do we make sure that like everyone has access to testing their water, making sure that they don't have lead, or making sure they have lead-free paint in their homes, right? Or we're talking about having I guess recently was in, where was I at? I've been in so many places recently. I was in Washington, D.C., and there was a panel around black farmers. And like, as a black person, I've never ever been introduced to farming until like I just hear about these things in a concept or through panels. But one of the things, if I know that us as black people, if we had more control over our food in the way that we grew our food, then we would have a better knowledge of the things that we're taking in our body. So when we're talking about when we're going to some of these markets and some of these unhealthy processed foods, those are the things that are causing cancer and causing our bodies to be able to fail and fall apart. But those things only exist in black and brown communities, right? And we're talking about food deserts. Those things are more likely to happen in black communities than they are in white communities, right? When we go to white communities, we see things like Trader Joe's, right? Or we see things that have healthier options. But when we come to black communities, they want to give us ramen noodles. It's a real thing. So when you talk about like, how do we approach this? Like, we have to have a holistic approach. And a lot of times, unfortunately, as a legislator, my job, and as I see it, is that I have to think forwardly thinking for my constituents. I used to be a server. I was a server for 6 years. And that is to many people, a basic job. But I've learned a lot about how to care for people and how to think for people when they're not thinking for themselves. And that's what I bring to this job, and that's how I see this. So when I think about environmental justice, I think about how do we make sure that, I remember just last year, 2023, we had, I didn't know until there was a potential contamination spill in the Schuylkill River, that we had 3 water plants here in Philadelphia. And one of the water plants is right here in this district. And it's like just making sure that folks know where their water is coming from. Because when the oil spill happened in the Schuylkill, then there was potential zip codes that was impacted. And knowing where those impacted zip codes were, and just making sure that folks are aware of the threats to potential harm. So I'll stop right there.
Thank you. We had a couple questions, please.
Hi, good morning. I was here last week.
Like that. All right. That one works. That means you will use too much juice. Too much juice. Good.
Hello. Now I'm too loud. Good morning. I was here last Monday for the information. The information I was given in reference to, and this is for Dr. Hall, the information I was given to in reference to the dialysis, the kidney functions and how the kidney works, I think I missed what is the normal kidney function number?
Thank you.
So that's a really good question, and I'm glad that you brought that up because it gives me a chance to say what I think you should know. So the same way it was mentioned earlier in
Go ahead. That's not you.
okay, the same way it was mentioned earlier in description, it's really important to know your numbers. The number that you're asking about is called the EGFR, estimated glomerular filtration rate. Think about that as your percent kidney function. When you go to your doctor, thank you, and get blood work done, one of the tests that they will do is to measure EGFR. That's part of the basic chemistry that we order. That number, the cutoff of what's considered normal is 60. So if you're above 60, whatever above 60 you are, that's considered normal. Once you drop below 60, that's when you start to enter the stages of kidney disease 3, 4, and 5 that you will probably need to be followed for more closely. So as long as your number is above 60, that's considered okay. Now there's nuance to that, and there's quite a bit more to explain, even about how the numbers are calculated. There have been some recent changes as it relates to Black people and certain ways that our former calculations sort of measured kidney function in Black people. However, that's the number you should keep in mind. For women, that number is based on also another number, your creatinine. Creatinine is just like, it is sort of it's a metabolic byproduct of muscle turnover, okay? So as you're just going about your life, doing things active with using your muscles, some of that material will be broken down and turned over. The product of that process, a product of that process is called creatinine. For men, your creatinine level your number shouldn't be too much higher than 1, maybe 1.1. When for women, it might be 0.8, 0.9 because muscle mass is different. When your creatinine number runs up higher, 1.3, 1.4, 2, that's when there's some issues with the kidneys. And we know that because usually the kidneys will find molecules like creatinine, also gets rid of phosphorus too, but for creatinine, it usually gets rid of enough creatinine to keep your number around that 1.1, 1.0. If it can't do that, that says the kidney's having a problem. So it's an inverse measurement. We're making an assumption about your kidney's performance based on what it's not doing with respect to that number. But the EGFR is probably our closest estimate of actual kidney performance.
Would you also add, because inherent in that question, Jasmine last week told us about how because of the numbers that were used for African Americans versus for whites, that kept some people off the transplant list.
Right.
And she was one of those examples. And has that now been corrected?
Yes, so there were a number of things that have changed very recently. And, the Floyd murder actually spawned a lot of these changes, or at least a lot of intensity in approaching our way of dealing with health inequities and how we manage issues of common experience differently in different populations. What was the case was that as we were trying to generate ways to estimate kidney function, years ago, there were certain correction factors or adjustments to the way that the numbers were calculated that were added in reflecting what people thought were unique features about African Americans relative to other populations. What the assumption that was made then was that African Americans carried a higher muscle mass. So when you would see reports of kidney function years ago, and I think Jasmine may have mentioned this, is that you would see things like EGFR white, EGFR black, and that was about how that correction for the degree of muscle mass influenced the way the numbers worked out. After the Floyd murder, there was a lot of attention to the way that these calculations were done because it was clear that they were not performing at in the level that we wanted. Specifically, they were delaying our ability to detect actual disease or actual severity of disease in African Americans. And so people would be going along a lot further in a disease before it was recognized that they needed the help. In the end, that change has taken hold. We've eliminated that correction factor and tried to build in other things to make things more accurate. And so the current calculations tend to be better, more accurate to the person in the moment, and that's sort of a recent development of the past few years.
All right, thank you very much. Deacon, you had a question, sir.
Good afternoon. This is particularly to Dr. Williams. During your presentation on the bundle, you spoke about how the numbers changed, and to me it appeared to be a negative impact as a result of the 6% incentive being removed. So my question is to my political brothers up here, what can we do as a people to ensure that that kind of behavior doesn't take place, even though it's not bound to the Hippocratic Oath, because that's not a legal concept? It is ethical and moral. And if we know from the numbers that people are dying as a result of something that we are intentionally doing, I find that appalling.
Dr. Williams, would you kind of reinforce that question, and then we'll turn it over to our panel?
No, it's a very good point, which is why I shared the data, because I do think it has a negative impact on patients. And, you know, I don't know quite how to say it, but certainly we know Tuskegee, we know, you know, research, we know all of those things. I think at the end of the day, we have to have science lead policy, not the other way around. And so I think when the science is there, the data is there, and it's telling us that we're not doing the right thing for patients, we have to listen to it. And so I think when you say, what can we do? Again, that is where policy, we have to lift our voices. We have to, you know, not only share the patient's voice, but data like this, data like that I shared, we got to elevate it so that folks know, look, you can't just say we're going to monitor it, look at it, and then not do anything about it. And then you have to, what do we say? If you don't know history, you're destined to repeat it. So we can't continue to do the same thing when we actually have data that says what we're doing is not helping, it's actually hurting. And so I think we collectively and individually have to raise our voices to say, no, this is not right. And we have to continue to collect the data as well. I mean, so we have to be vigilant in terms of making sure that the data is there and that it leads us in finding the right answers.
However, I'm coming over that way in a second. There was a recent killing of a CEO of United Healthcare Insurance, which brought to mind, for those people who didn't think about healthcare, suddenly people now thought about health insurance and how we're going to pay for this. A couple of days ago, the CEO of United Healthcare Group, which is the umbrella organization, wrote an opinion piece in the New York Times where he said, we're not doing a very good job. He also said that we have perhaps the most messed up healthcare system in terms of insurance and delivery of any country in the world. Now, he may be very gratuitous in his remarks, given that his company contributes a lot. However, there is an interesting point to be made with there is an end-sum game to how much we're going to pay for this. The question comes down is who is paying for the health care that we're getting, which includes hospitalizations, physician visits, medications. Who determines who's going to get what service, who's not going to get what services? Because do we have a sustainable model? So Matt, I'll ask you, in terms of from a pharmaceutical company whose business it is to direct and develop new products, you want the government, in this case, to be the bad guy to say, no, we're not going to pay for this? Or do you want the health insurer to say we're not going to pay for it? Or is it the patient that's going to come down? And Mr. Hooker, from your perspective, from the Teamsters, you guys want the best plan that you can get that money can buy for your people. And I'm not going to argue it's not deserved. But at the end of the day, we have to look at cost and who is paying for this. So we'll start with you, Matt, and then go to Mr. Hooker, and then I'm going to ask Dr. Hall can comment, then we'll take the final question from back over there. Is this model sustainable, and who's going to be the one that has to blink first?
Ooh. Well, Wayne, thank you for all the hard-hitting questions today. I want to back up a little bit and first say that any movement in this country, whether you're talking civil rights, women's suffrage, the labor movement, et cetera, succeeded partially because of coalitions like this. So in terms of how you make a difference and how you ensure that people in seats of power hear you, this is a wonderful start to that. And it's been really heartening through my job working for Ardelyx to see coalitions like this. I mean, we've got elected officials, we've got labor, we've got faith, we've got industry, and nonprofit all aligned in saying that this is not right and that access is a huge issue for patients. And in terms of who's going to pay for it, I think it's also worth noting that if CMS bundles these kidney medications, the Congressional Budget Office, which is an arm of the government, has said that taxpayers will actually have to foot the bill to the tune of $180 million to implement this bundling. And furthermore, patients will be saddled with over $200 million in additional co-insurances. So yeah, it's a very legitimate question to ask who is going to pay for these things, but I think beyond who's going to pay for it, the gentleman said before that this really comes down to a basic issue of humanity, regardless of who is going to pay for it. And heck, the bundle was created initially with the best of intentions to ensure that kidney patients had access to the care that they needed to stay healthy and to survive. So I think we need to look at it through that lens. And the Kidney Patient Act would preserve the status quo in a good way and make sure that patients who've been relying on these therapies for most of their lives with the disease would continue to have them. And thankfully, we've got a system in place to pay for that. It's just making sure that Medicare doesn't go the wrong way and put up the stone wall. And the other thing that I would mention as well from a pharmaceutical perspective is innovation, right? I mean, our healthcare system, love it or hate it, and certainly, taking my professional hat off, there are a lot of flaws with healthcare delivery in this system in this country. But we really lead the way on a worldwide scale in terms of medical innovation, particularly from my perspective in the biotech and biopharma industry. I mean, our therapy at Ardelyx is the first that the FDA has approved in over 2 decades. And this isn't about our therapy, there are other ones as well. But I think that really speaks to the innovative quality of what's going on here. And if government makes it harder and disincentivizes companies like ours from continuing to innovate, that's going to have a long-lasting effect on patients ultimately as well.
There were 2 comments I got as I was working my way back. Mr. Hooker, before you comment, one was the First Lady said, I'm from Canada. Why are we even having this kind of discussion? Number 2 was, somebody's hungry. So, but Mr. Hooker, you're looking for the best that you can get for your union members. Are you contributing to the problem, or are you making sure that your constituency is taken care of?
So that's a hard-hitting question, and I hope I don't get in trouble for what I'm about to say, but
nobody's listening.
I kind of agree with the sister from Canada because in my position, when we go to negotiate a contract, of course, we want the best health care for our members. But oftentimes, that health care is tied into employment. So what happens if the member gets fired? They don't have any health care. When we try to negotiate, we don't get the maximum of pension contributions or wages because they had to put so much money into the health care. So I've been going back and forth with this idea of what happens if we have some type of universal health care. I don't know what that looks like, but I know some people would go for it, some people wouldn't. But from my position, when you deal with certain employers, for the young lady that I was talking about earlier, she got fired. So she didn't have the health care that she normally would have under the company plan. And so it took her a lot longer to get that kidney that she needed because she didn't have health care. And so my position is, I agree with the sister from Canada. I think we should have some sort of universal health care where companies and corporations can't just dominate healthcare, the whole healthcare system, because that's what happened. You saw, I mean, like you brought it up, the CEO gets killed because of, you know, how they do healthcare in this country. And from a labor standpoint, I would rather go to the table, not having to worry about healthcare at all. Because if you can't hold that over my members' head, they get fired, they get suspended, then their family's still covered. So I'm in the vein of, I believe we should have universal health care.
I wish for each of the panel members to think of one point. Go ahead, give a clap for that. That's a real good point. I want each of the panel members to think of one take-home point that you want us to have after this final question. So I'm gonna start at Dr. Hall and work my way to the youngest representative. So youth does have its advantages, sir. So please, go ahead.
Thank you for the information. I believe, Dr. Hall, I believe you said only about 10% of the kidney is able to function for the things that you do to help those with kidneys that are not functioning. And I was just wondering, is there any research that's being done to help improve that percentage, or anything that monies that are being set aside to help even preventing the disease? I know this is mostly a Black issue from what you were saying. So I know with cancer, there's a lot of money there. Since it's mostly a Black issue, are we having a problem getting money for research to help make it better?
Thank you very much. Dr. Hall.
Yeah, those are great questions. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to sort of maybe reconfigure my statement. What I was trying to say was that dialysis can replace, when it's being done on typical schedules and people are adhering properly, it can give you back the equivalent of about 10%, roughly there, of kidney function, which has you just skating across the trees. It has nothing to do with making the kidneys work 10% better. Once your kidneys fail, they failed. All this does is it replaces that function, and it does so at a level of about 10, if you're being generous, particularly if you still have a little bit of your own kidney function left, maybe 15%. But that's enough to keep you alive, and that's, you know, what we're working to optimize constantly. Is there effort to try and come up with new and innovative strategies to replace kidney function? Absolutely. There are some really, really smart, innovative programs that are bringing together bioengineers, kidney doctors, physicists even, to figure out how do you generate or how do you develop an artificial kidney. There are sorts of, there's interest and research in categories of transplantation from animals. That's called xenotransplantation. Very, very early, and I would not necessarily put a whole lot of my coins in that bucket, but there really are a lot of active areas of interest and innovation around how do we engineer artificial kidney function. And so I would say hope is definitely on the horizon.
Before we get to the panel again, remember we talked about there was the Marion Lucker Kidney Foundation. People could come up there and register. We do have winners. So.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Lynette Lukers. I'm with the Marion Lukers Kidney Foundation. We are a local nonprofit here in the Philadelphia area. We had an informational table out in the lobby, and we have our winner, which is Regina McDuffie. Is she here? All right. Number count was 2,300. She had 2,500. Just real quick, we have a kidney scholarship for any graduating high school senior for $1,000. We have information out there as well, and you can get information on mlkidney.org. Thank you so much.
Panel, you get another reprieve. Senator Street, thank you very much for being here with us today. So your big question, since you just got here with us, we know you've been busy. We know that Medicare funds the, as far as renal, covering dialysis and other renal disease. Medicaid also does have a part in terms of we're looking at paying for certain medications for patients on renal, who have end-stage renal disease, haven't gotten to dialysis yet. What can we, as your constituency, do to get help to make sure that we're getting adequate services for those patients with renal disease? And what would you like us to know about how we can help you help us?
Well, one, thank you. One, I want to apologize to everyone. I know in the midst of all the other things I was doing, somehow I was doing some research on clean energy, and then Miss Sharon Vaughn, my district director, said, "You were supposed to be up here on this panel." I said, "What time?" She said, "Right now." So I hustled my way up here. I apologize for that. Look, the question is a really good one. There are many people, most of us will at some point have our health care funded through either Medicare or Medicaid or a combination of the two. For those who don't know, Medicare is the health insurance that the government provides for our more seasoned citizens. And Medicaid is the health care that we provide for people who are financially challenged for whatever reasons. Now, some of us are, particularly for people who have renal failure, it is likely that Medicaid will play a part in your funding, because what will happen is when Medicare runs out and your personal resources run out, we all end up on Medicaid. Most people receiving nursing care and all those things. So there are a few things we should do. One, sometimes in sort of pre-renal failure, there are dietary changes that can be made that can be helpful in actually stopping you from reaching full-on renal failure. Right now, Medicaid dollars are restricted by the federal government in a way that does not allow us to for it to fund dietary changes, whereas if you have private health care insurance, that sometimes can. The second issue is we need to make sure that people are accessing those dollars and are aware before you get into complete financial failure. And then the third thing I would say that is a really important issue related to this is there's no reason that you should have to sacrifice your home. You should sacrifice all of your assets, because often if you go into having extensive Medicaid will look to recover those dollars from your estate, and then you can lose it. So there are two things. We need to be advocating that be a change done by Congress. And in the short run, we need to look at estate planning in a way that you move if you anticipate you need Medicaid funding, at least 3 years prior to that, we make sure that you transfer your assets into an irrevocable trust that you can still manage, but it will protect your assets from being taken. And so that's sort of a roundabout answer to the question, but hopefully it was helpful.
Thank you very much, Senator. And I should point out that Representative Carroll and Representative Mitchell also made sure that we knew how to reach them at the State House, but they also provided their home addresses and telephone numbers, so we'll expect to hear those from you after.
I think most of this room has my home address and telephone number, but you can reach me in the office at 215-227-6161. We have, I think our Germantown office is 215-457-5200. And you can call us at either office. Ms. Vaughn is here from my Germantown office in the Northwest Philadelphia, and I also have an office near Temple.
I know there are a lot of other questions, but because of time, we're going to have to go ahead and go to this part. If you have some questions, ask us after the formal program is open. We'll still be around. Dr. Hall, let's start off with you. What's the take-home point, sir?
I would just say, again, thank you for making this opportunity available. Like I said last week, time is kidney. And what I mean by that is you just have to be very conscious of where you are in your particular health portfolio, and get engaged. Talk to your physicians, set up a primary care appointment if you don't have one. ask about those transitions of care. Doc, do I need a kidney doctor? Do I need a cardiologist? Do I need this or whatever? Time is kidney, though, and I just want you to be very conscious of your kidney health.
Well, once again, it is good to be here. And my takeaway. Testing, yes. As alluded to earlier, I would suggest to you that you be proactive. You do not wait. As a matter of fact, I'm glad you're here, Dr. Hall. I hope you brought your kit with you. I have a regular relationship with my physician, but I can't recall if I asked for a kidney check. So if you got your kit here, we can do that. I'm sure there'd be a long line of folks here that would be willing to take advantage of that as well. But I would be engaged. You know, I mentioned Stan Watson's community meeting. It just recalls at his community meetings, they even give blood pressure checks at his community meeting. So I would suggest to you that you make sure that you are proactive and not reactive.
So thank you for having me again. I want to give honor to the bishops here. I would just say that make sure you talk to your coworkers, especially young people. We feel like we are invincible to any type of ailment, so please talk to your grandbabies, your babies, whoever. Tell them about going getting checked out, going getting tested, because it's very, very important, especially in our communities. And especially talk to the workers, especially talk to them.
Again, I want to say thank you all for having us today. Thank you for curating the space and emphasizing exactly what the panel already said. Just staying in tune. If you know, data says that us as black folks, and especially as a black man, that we don't do enough of checking in with our primary care doctors. I go to the doctors twice a year, every 6 months, and I'm very proud about that. But that became from the teachings of my grandmother. A lot of my colleagues, or friends, I should say, not colleagues, but friends, don't have the same experience. You want to make sure that you're getting ahead of your health, because if you know early on, you'll be able to prevent things from dismantling later on. So I just want to say, just make sure that you do your annual visits and that you stay on top of yourself.
All right. Look, thank you, Bishop Morris, for your leadership in this community. Thank you, Bishop Felton, for your leadership both in this community and in our larger community as president of Black Clergy of Philadelphia vicinity. I would also like to say a couple of things. One, as my dad said, don't forget to drink your water. Drinking water is a basic thing, but can be really helpful in terms of kidney health. Just sort of fleshing out all those things. It's a simple, basic thing. Don't forget to drink your water. My dad literally used to say that at the end of almost everything he did. He's 81. He's still walking around. If you want to be walking around like Bishop Norris in his 90s and my dad in his 80s and doing all those things, make sure you drink plenty of water. The second thing I would say, it is important that we make sure both in our actual lives and in the lives of our community, we access the care that's available to us. We need to advocate to make sure that care continues to be available for everyone. And then the final point, as we look at the research and all the innovations that are happening, we need to make sure that that research and that funding includes studies related to both the physical and the behavioral indicia that are related to black folk. All too often, the research and the treatments don't look at our condition. And so and a lot of that is driven by government funding. So we need to make sure that our leaders are making sure that funding continues to flow and making sure treatment and research includes our condition, both physically and societally. Thank you so much. God bless.
Let's give a hand to the panel, please. Remind you to please fill out the survey, fill out the second part of your survey. If you haven't filled out the first part, do fill out the first part. To close things out, we're going to bring up Deacon Sean Merkel. So the brother who asked the question said he was hungry. I want him to know that the only thing standing between him and lunch right now is the good deacon. So Deacon, take us out.
I'm used to it. Can we say bless the Lord? Bless the Lord. First, I would like to give honor to God and say that this has been so awesome to see so many faces of color, people with genuine interest, people who want to share information and provide it for our society and to the HEAL organization. I pray that we take action. We should be taking action. I will speak with our founder, Bishop Morris, and our senior pastor, Bishop Felton, about what we, Mount Airy Church of God in Christ, a community church, can do and initiate. It's not like we're not doing a lot of things. We are. But this has to come to the top of the list in terms of making sure we engage with our members, with our community, and we start holding folks accountable. I was very appalled to see that they know by taking away money, people are dying, and nothing was done other than to record and report it. That's not the world we live in. God has greater for us, but we have to do our part. Okay, you have to get your surveys in. Please turn them in. They'll be in the aisles to collect them. We would like for you to join us for some food. If you go up the stairwell to, I guess that's your left, my right, you will be able to go to the fellowship hall and get a hot lunch and enjoy it. And we do have seating up there where you can sit down and eat it. It's not fried chicken. It's a healthy lunch, and everyone is invited to it. We certainly are blessed here in our church to have 2 bishops. Very unusual to find one in any church. So we know that this place is highly favored and blessed. We were opened by the founder, Bishop Morris. It would certainly be a fitting thing to have our pastor, Pastor Felton, come up and bless you as you leave us.
Well, let's give this wonderful panel another hand. They did a great job for us. We appreciate you. I'm not going to stand between you and your lunch, so let's stand for the prayer. We appreciate each of you for coming. I think we almost doubled what we did last week. Is that right, Ms. Gabriel? All right. Let us pray. Father, we thank you that the church is a healing place. Your word says, I wish above all things that you may prosper and be in health even as your soul prospers. May you continue to give us grace to live healthy lives, to help one another, to love one another, and to remain connected and interactive with the information that we have received. May you bless our food and fellowship. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you. All right, Dr. Hall. Thank you. You were both.